welcome back to another episode of the Catholic Buzz podcast. We're so happy that you're joining us today, our second episode of season 2. My name is Father Daniele, and I'm joined, as always, by Josh Sullivan and Matt Van Milligan.
Hello.
Season 2 was off to a great start last week, I believe. Yeah, and today we're going to continue some important conversations because we are heading into the Christmas season, right? And what happens at Christmas is always, families gather together. I know different parts of the world right now have maybe different restrictions and stuff for COVID still. But I know that some people who get together for Christmas, even sometimes in my extended family, in my family when they gather together, there's always that awkward sort of situation, who's going to church,
That's right.
And some want to go to church, some don't want to go to church, right? Then there's always the faithful, like the faithful grandma or whatever it might be, that's always at midnight mass every Christmas. And then there's this bit of a tension,
for sure.
And I think with COVID, actually, it's kind of become easier to skip out on church, right? Because it's like, we
don't have to.
And we got
bishops say we don't have to.
Yeah, and we got to leave room for people who want to go.
That's right.
There's restrictions. And
it doesn't matter to me as much as it matters to other people, so I'll let them go and fill up the seats because I don't want to take up a spot.
Exactly.
They need to go. I don't. I pray at home.
I pray at home, which is funny.
Bull.
Actually, yeah, you're calling people out on that today.
I call bull.
I want to hear you call people out on that today because today we are going to talk about why it's important to have the church, and how do we explain that to people who don't see the church as important? And we're going to talk about the kind of big C church, like the institution of the Catholic Church, and then our local church as well, right? Yeah. So where do you want to begin? We're going to talk about the importance of the church. Why is the church important? So someone who says, I don't need the church, there's people online, Matt, you love online commentators, right? Who say, it's time for us to shut down the Catholic Church and for all the evils they've done and for all these things. Why do we need the Catholic Church today?
And a lot of times when this crops up, it's usually in response to some scandal or some issue with kind of the institution of the church itself, or against specific members within the church. So people kind of distance themselves from the institution, and one of the ways that they do that is like distinguishing between religion and faith. Of like, well, I'm faithful, but I'm not religious. I'm not committed to going through these rituals, and if we're kind of calling bull, that the religious impulse is inevitable. It's present in us, whether or not we direct that towards going to church regularly or otherwise. So other areas where we can kind of or this can manifest is like
what would someone
hockey. Or just like people are close adherents of the liturgical calendar of NFL football, or just like that's you have.
It's very true.
Yeah.
We would drive by, we would be driving by on Sunday morning, going to mass with my 4 boys in the car, and the arena is packed full to the gills for hockey. And people would be constantly, I remember just doing different kinds of preparations, confirmation prep or whatever, and we're asking the kids, listen, you're making a sacrament at the church. Please come to the church for this Sunday Mass because we're going to do this, that, and the other thing. And the excuses would be, oh, no, I got hockey. Church takes a back seat because we have something else. Our religion is hockey. It's more important than the church itself, you know what I mean? Or the church will wait for me, hockey won't, if that maybe makes more sense.
Yeah, and just as an aside, I've been listening all year to the Bible in a Year podcast with Father Mike Schmitz, which is wonderful. If you're listening today to us, you should be listening to Father Mike Schmitz, But in an episode, he talks about that, how that, when we put our focus on stuff like hockey or dance or football, like Matt says, that we are showing that is our Lord.
Yeah.
That is our God, because we're spending all our time there. We're putting the priority there instead of where we should be.
Yeah. If you want to know where your religion is, you look at your calendar and you look at your wallet. Where do you spend your money?
Where do you spend your time?
Where do you spend your time?
Yes.
Those are the two things.
Exactly.
Yeah, and we don't want to say that organized sports are
a bad thing. No, of course
inherently bad or anything like that.
Of course.
But it is an indication of our priority, and the fact that we still the idea that we kind of distance ourselves from ritual or religion and say, okay, well, we're just we still in other areas of our life, we're still pretty committed to ritual and ceremony and all of these kind of seasons, and just the fact that, you know, our non-religious family members are still celebrating Christmas with us. Like,
Sure.
they're still kind of
Yeah, of course.
in that, you know, maybe a boiled down version of that kind of liturgical rhythm. But you, like, people still, whatever they think of marriage, still like weddings, or still like going to these big ceremonies where everybody gets dressed up, and it's that, you know, we haven't. There's a bit of disingenuousness, if that's a word, in just the claim that, you know, I'm religious, or I'm not religious, but I am faithful, because you can't avoid kind of that religious impulse.
Yeah, and what the church does, you know, is, you know, first, I get the feeling, like, when people talk about the church today, it's like, you know, people like to say it's man-made, like man-made religion.
Yeah, yeah.
And, you know, sometimes people are so stubborn with this argument that it's hard to sort of break that down. But, I mean, that couldn't be further from the truth, right? Especially when we're talking about the Catholic Church, which we are today. It's not man-made. It's divinely made. You know, Jesus is the one who instituted the church.
Yeah.
And so this argument that it's man-made. Now, is it man-run today?
Yeah.
You know, sure, we have a hierarchy of the church that is sort of set in charge from the day that Jesus handed over the keys to Peter, right? Like, and said, on this rock I will build my church. It has been sort of people-led, but divinely inspired or divinely birthed into the world. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And again, I would say that, like, if airing my beef with kind of public discourse on social media, you have kind of two competing identities of the church. Like, you do have the human institution of the church that, you know, is administrated by people with free will who, you know, are allowed to make mistakes, and some of them very public and some of them very terrible. But you have kind of the sacramental historical identity of the church as the body of Christ on earth. But, you know, go to your social media page. That's not what you see.
No.
Go to church. That's what you see, or that's what you're there to encounter, that identity of the church.
So we're talking about the sort of authority in the church, right? So why is that important? You know, and I do sympathize with people who have been turned off from the church because of something an authority figure has done. You know, me as a priest, you know, when I sort of reflect on the horrors that were done by priests, whether it's the abuse scandals, you know, or, you know, you name it, there's been sort of lots of scandals. You know, it really saddens me. It breaks my heart. And it's a stain on the church, right? So people say, well, why do we even need that anymore if people are not fulfilling what the mission of the church is?
Yeah, and that was a big thing for me coming from a Protestant background into the church is the question of authority. And what you're saying is that, like, those things are made all the more horrible by the fact that they're done by people in positions of authority who are abusing positions of trust, because there's a responsibility that comes with authority. Not to go kind of full Spider-Man, but no, but the question of authority has been around kind of since the beginning, and, you know, with a Protestant formation initially, that it's Jesus and me, and I have the Bible, and I'm supposed to read the Bible. That's supposed to be the authority, the guiding authority for my faith, and that is sustainable to a point. That, you know, we mentioned in previous podcasts that, like, I was really interested in biblical language study, these kinds of more of kind of a scholarly historical approach to Scripture, because I wanted to understand it better. But in that process, I'm putting my hands in the authority of this linguistic scholar, this professor of hermeneutics, all these people. So it's like there's a historical and epistemological distance between myself and Jesus that is, like, that I can't bridge in any way except by some appeal to authority. So I have kind of two options, well, three options, but, like, two options there of I either put my hand in, or my you know, my faith in the hands of this PhD, or I turn inward, or I rely on my own authority. And that was really problematic for me, because the question there is, what's to keep my faith from becoming something that I'm just free to invent and reinvent in accordance with what I prefer. The third option is that, you know, I hand over that authority, or I put my trust in the authority that Christ himself established in the church.
Yeah, and this is my problem today with, since, you know, we're really shooting the bull today,
Yeah.
I guess, if we're going to call bull.
Yeah.
You know, my problem today is that people, when they say they're spiritual, not religious, you know, or even Catholics, people who are baptized Catholic, maybe not practicing, they say they practice at home. They'll say stuff like, well, I pray at home. They like to, that little moniker, you know, what would Jesus do? That's what's important to them. But then they answer that question, what would Jesus do? Like, the answer that they're using reflects their own idea of God and not necessarily who God is. And Matt, you brought up a really good point, because who is there to lead us? You know, like, you look at the scriptures, you know, when on the side of the road where someone is reading the scriptures to the guy who asked to be baptized, it's like, you haven't heard or understood the scriptures.
Yeah,
the
yeah,
eunuch,
yeah, the
you know?
eunuch, yeah.
And he's like, how could I if no one instructs me?
Yeah. How do I
could
understand this if no one
instructs me?
How to use? Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's what we're turning into. We're turning into sort of a community of people who would rather rely on their own understanding. You know, like, I go into the high schools and schools in general, you know, and talk to college students, university students, and the ideas they have about faith are really their own, guided by what they see on TikTok or what they see in the news or whatever it might be. But they don't know the actual Jesus, or they don't know what Jesus actually said.
No, they're putting their authority that they're trusting in some random YouTube star, or
Which is absurd, isn't it? Because they'll say, like, oh, you're crazy for believing in a God, but I'm going to put all my faith in some TikTok star or something like that, right?
I think it's important to realize that we, like you were talking about, how we do have faith, we have religious inclinations, if you will. Like, we have things in our lives that we do fall into that. So when people say, well, no, I'm faithful, but I'm not religious, what they're trying to say is that I'm not a part of the institution of the church that they see as being corrupt or bad or whatever. But they're not understanding that the corruption is with the people themselves, not with the institution that Christ created on earth. And so the Holy Spirit guides that church. And so our decisions and the wisdom that comes has 2,000 years of experience, 2,020 years of experience with where the Holy Spirit's guiding us. So when it talks about things like, we talk about things like contraception, we talk about things, marriage, when we talk about all these areas in the church has 2,000 years of this experience, and it's said pretty much the same thing always. You know what I mean? It's not really changed his mind too much on too much of that stuff. So in a way of thinking about it, to me, I see my 2-year-old telling me that they think they're really smart and this is how that things need to be done, with me with 40 years of experience sitting back going, oh, you poor thing. Like, okay, go ahead. I told you not to, but you go ahead and try it. Oh, look, you got hurt. Okay, here we go. Pick you up, and I'll bring you back. That's what I see when I see somebody who has like 40-year-old experience saying, "Listen, 2,000-year-old church.
Yeah,
I know how to do this moral thing better than you," but sometimes it takes the experience of hitting that rock bottom or realizing that you aren't all that to get there. Yeah,
it reminds me, I know this is sort of recent news, maybe yesterday or today, I don't know, but just a few days ago, the Pope was visiting Greece.
Yeah.
And he did this apostolic visit to Greece, and so they had this gymnasium, this basketball gymnasium, full of young people where he was addressing. And what did he talk to them about? He gave this really good message about, don't be prisoners, is the word he used. Don't be prisoners to your cell phone. And the point he was making was, when we're just so enthralled by what's there, we're missing out on like another view where God is maybe placing in our lives. And he says the other thing we're missing out on is the human connection. He says the closeness between people that you feel when you're in someone else's presence or something like that. That's how the church started. Mm-hmm. That's how the church started, with people talking to people, with the apostles going out and spreading the gospel, right? And today, I think we're relying a little too much, maybe, on other means of communication. I always tell people, stop asking your angry uncle about the church, right? Because, that's what we do. Yeah. We go around, like we're talking about the Christmas table coming up soon, and we listen to people who are so mad at the church who tell us all these conspiracies. Jesus was actually married and all this stuff, and they're just, sure, with respect to your family members, that's great to sit and listen to them, but let's talk to someone, like we're talking about authority in the church. Let's talk to someone who's given their life in service to the church and see, the right information here. If you were struggling with, something in math, like if you were a student in university, you were struggling in math, you're
not going to go to your angry uncle who hated math and failed.
Exactly. You're not going to ask your angry uncle who failed.
That's a good point. You're going to go ask your math teacher.
You're going to ask your professor, or you're going to ask someone who's passed or who's done really well. But with religion, all of a sudden, everyone is an expert. Yeah. And that is the problem. Everyone is not an expert in religion. And I think this problem is perpetuated by this idea, when even Catholic institutions, whether they're hospitals or schools or whatever it might be, they like to use buzzwords, like we're all gathered together by faith, or it's hope that brings us together, or whatever it might be, right? And so all of a sudden we've given ourselves a license to talk about the Catholic Church or to talk about Catholic faith using these buzzwords that are empty. There's no truth to them, right?
Yeah. I think part of it comes from in Canada, anyways. And I don't know, maybe other parts of the world too. If you're listening from there, you can write in. But I know in Canada we're culturally Catholic, and so like our culture in Canada, we have all the different cultures came into Canada, most being Catholic, and so we have a lot of these people that I guess continued on their faith from as cradle Catholics and then became Catholic, and then they baptized their kids because their parents did it to them, and they didn't have an understanding what faith really was. And so when you ask them, why do you have to go to church? Why is the church important? You're asking those questions, there's not an answer there. You know what I mean? And because they just don't know. And sometimes it takes a lot of pride. I mean, it takes a lot of humility to admit, actually, I don't know. I do it.
Right.
I do this and I don't know. Versus saying the opposite, which is, well, it's because and making an excuse up, or saying, and then when you start getting questioned on it, you start getting defensive and start getting angry, and then all of a sudden it becomes a big deal.
And it is funny that I don't know how funny it is, but it is funny.
We'll judge. We'll judge.
When you're either like culturally habituated to go to mass or to go to church or to participate in the ritual or the tradition of, and then you encounter this. Okay, why am I doing this? And you go on a retreat, and someone says something like, "Oh, you're just going through the motions," and like that phrase, "going through the motions," that you don't have like any kind of core investment in what you're doing, but you're doing this because it's part of that ritual, it's part of that habit, and it's usually spoken of in kind of a disparaging way, and like for the purposes like that makes sense. But it's like at some point, in some way, you want to kind of say like, God bless going through the motions. That like religion and faith helps us to kind of bridge the gap when our feelings and our desires are deficient. That it's like if you're in a marriage and you want to like you don't feel in a particularly good place to love your spouse as they deserve. Like, God bless the guy who's going through the motions and actually being affectionate and caring, even though it's not what he feels at the moment. That it's like, and that's something that like habituating ourselves in this way, that it kind of carries us to the next point. It's like, well, I don't feel like doing this. I don't feel like going to mass today. So I'm being authentic to myself. But it's like, we have a higher calling, or we have, the structure of the church and the structure of liturgy and the structure of kind of the sacramental life allows us to kind of bridge those points when our desires are deficient.
All right. It was funny.
It
was funny.
I was going to give it a 2.5 when you started talking about a marriage. I went up to about 4.5.
But Matt's got a point, as usual, is like, okay, so the sacraments of the church, these ordered ways of bringing us into full communion with the church, right? So right off the beginning with baptism, baptism, we're made one with Christ. We're made members of his holy church, right? But this is the beginning of our Christian journey, right? And the sacraments are something that you can only get in the church, right? Yeah. And you mentioned marriage, and there are other institutions or other things have sort of taken the idea of our Catholic sacraments and made them into secular things, right? So now people who don't want to be baptized because they don't know if they're religious, they'll have something like naming ceremonies or something, right? I've just heard this recently that people still, even though they're not having baptism, will ask people to be their godparents of a kid, even though there's no baptism involved. They'll just have a party, and it's like an honorary title, all these things. Like, look at confession. People are so afraid of confession, of going to a priest to confess their sins. But how many avenues do we have online to share our deepest secrets with, or
deep grievances,
or do whatever? You know what I mean? So, and let's not even. Sacrament of the sick, healing things, from stones and rocks to odors and incenses and things. That's just naming a few of things that people have taken the idea. It's like these things of God this is what they're thinking. These things of God are so ridiculous, right? That I don't want anything to do with them. So I'll go play with my rocks over here, or I'll go, confess my deepest, darkest sin online, as if to say that there's some beauty in that, right?
Yeah. I think that's where the church's authority does come in, because we are human and we are emotional beings. And I know that I do a lot of stupid things when it comes to emotions. I know the right path, but I feel this way. And so if I'm going off of what I know is right, for instance, I know I'm a fat guy. I know that I should eat a certain way and that I should exercise so often and everything else. However, at certain times, I'm feeling this way, and so I'll give in to the temptation to eat more or to not exercise or to do whatever. Temptation is there, and our feelings can't lead the reality of what brings us to a better place. Does that make sense? Like, we can't go off of our emotional state and our feelings, because we won't get to a point. Because ultimately, we are trying to get... we have to work at getting better, not sit back and relax at getting better. Does that make sense?
So what is it? What is the end of the, someone's at their Christmas table. They're talking about this with a relative that says the church is so ridiculous, and all these different things. What can people say, or what can people do to explain the church and why the church is there for us, right? For us to grow in holiness, for us to grow more and more devoted to God in our life.
Pope Benedict said, I'm going to use this because it came in, being Christian is not the result of an ethical choice or a lofty idea, but the encounter with an event or person which gives a new horizon and a decisive direction. And that's Pope Benedict, and that was one of his themes kind of when he was Pope. What I see that is you have to remember that the church's purpose of being here is not to hold a lofty idea, or what was the other one, an ethical choice over someone else's head. That's not the point of the church. It's to introduce them to a person. It's to introduce them to Jesus. And so when you're approaching this subject from at a dinner table, it's not about holding a lofty idea. And that's what I think a lot of people feel like when you are a religious person. If you do go to Mass on a regular basis and everything else, they feel like you're trying to hold this religious authority over top of them. Yeah. And I don't, no, that doesn't apply to me. What you have to understand is they have to encounter Jesus. And that's what they need. And so what you want to do is bring them back to that point. Yeah. So why do you, if you were to ask me, why do I go to church? I can't speak for anybody else around the table. But why I do it is because I know I need to. Because the church makes me a better person. Because I need the sacraments. I need to have baptism, confirmation. To get to where I am now, I need to have the sacrament of the Eucharist on a weekly basis. Because I can tell when I don't, and then I need that awesome forgiveness in confession, and I need the graces that come with it, so I can strive to be a better person, or I can win the battles of temptation and everything else. And then why do I then impose that on my kids? why not? Like, if I
Yes.
know that this is what makes me a better person, like if you don't need that in your life, fine. I'm going to guess that every person that says they don't need to come to church or that they don't need the sacraments, there is a hole in their hearts that they try to fill with something else, whether that be, and again, I'm a sports guy, I love it, but maybe you fill it with hockey on Sundays and everything else, but there's always going to be a feeling that there's something quite missing.
Yeah.
You don't have that when you have the sacraments, because God made you and he gave you the directions through the Bible, through Jesus kind of coming down on earth and saying, this is exactly it, and I'm going to leave an institution here that directs my will. And so that you can turn to that institution when you're lost. And so that's what he's done. And so then, like, why wouldn't you go there when you got that hole, when you're feeling lost, when you go there? Go to the church and ask for the direction. And they will always bring you back to the sacraments, because that's how we get in touch with God. And that's where we get one-on-one with Jesus.
And this is a real thing.
Yeah.
Like, we were talking about lofty ideas, these encountering Jesus is real. Encountering Jesus in the sacraments is real. The Catholic Church is real. It's the divine institution of the Lord. Sometimes I think that people think, like, how could you believe in fairy tales, or how can you believe in these other stuff? But when you encounter Jesus, Jesus kind of steals your heart, right? And you're right. So we're not going to sort of win over people who are angry, with a conversation over the dinner table, right? We got to introduce them to Jesus. Now,
introduce the
someone's
person.
not ready to be introduced to Jesus. I think none of what we've talked about today is possible if we're not praying.
Because they bring them to Jesus.
If we're not praying, it's not possible to understand some of these things.
And if we encounter the other person as genuinely seeking, because a lot of times these discussions can take the form of, like, me particularly, like that's it's not a lofty idea. It's not a set of propositions that you can either prove or disprove. Although when you're talking about, like, why do you teach your kids this? I'm like, why do you teach your kids math? And you're like, it's useful and it's true. But like, no,
there you go.
No, but like a lot of times we jump into this kind of apologetic mode where you're just going to overcome everyone's oppositions to the thing. But like, nobody gets married because someone overcame all of their oppositions to getting married. It's like, no, you encounter a person, you make a decision that it's and there is a place for those types of discussions, but humanizing the person as asking genuine questions, legitimately being frustrated with the decisions that individuals who sometimes represent Catholicism in their mind make, that you can have this discussion, but ultimately their conversion, their understanding of your faith isn't boiled down to a set of lofty ideas or assenting to specific propositions. It's encountering a person, encountering the person of Christ.
Yeah, and that's why I think we're talking big C Catholic Church institution, but that's why I think small C church, like your local community church, is important as well, because we're surrounding ourselves with people who might support us in that, right? Who are praying for us, we can have these discussions with, so wherever you're listening or watching from, your local parish should be a place where your questions are answered, where you can stop your priest and ask, or your parishioners, where you're building up a community. That's the community, right from when the people started gathering for Mass in their homes, right? In their basements,
together.
Right in the early church, it was with people, people were gathered together because, sort of the old saying, there's strength in numbers, but this is really important because this is where those conversations should take place, not hastily or angrily over a
dinner table,
a family event,
or entering comments into a
social media.
Yeah.
And that's what our churches are. Our churches should be places where our faith is developed, but it's also encouraged. We're praying for each other. We're praying for the needs of our community, the needs of the church, and we're being people who are just generally interested and looking forward to encountering Jesus.
I think leaving it, if you're having a conversation and you don't know how to win the conversation, first of all, you're doing it wrong. But the second part is give them to Jesus. And that was an old Jamaican priest, and I love it dearly. I listened to the talk, and he just kept saying, give it to Jesus. So he said, what I'm going to encourage you to do is then encourage them to have an open mind if they're willing to. Tell them, take the Bible, go to the bedroom, and have an honest 5-minute conversation in silence with God. Don't let anything else distract you, and let Him prove. Like, if you can't get by their barriers, you can't get by their barriers. God can. Jesus can. And so it's not about you. It's not about you winning. It's about Jesus entering to them, their hearts, right? So just give them to Jesus. So have them and ask them to go to adoration. Ask them whether that is, but a 5-minute conversation with Jesus in their bedroom in all silence with a Bible. Ask God, open the Bible, read the Bible, see what God has to say with them. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And if they're willing and truly open to it, then they're going to find the truth. And if they're not, you're going to just keep praying.
Yeah. Amen. Okay. Yeah, honestly. And, that's what the church exists for is, God has given us life and we're to flourish in this life by being people who sort of try to discover His will for us. And the church is the place where it encourages us to do that, right? Through the sacraments and through the teachings of the church. Okay, well, we are out of time for today. Thanks for this discussion. Hopefully people can be better prepared, I guess, at their holiday table. Yeah. So we do invite your feedback. I know we were calling bull a lot today, right? So if people want to call bull on us, they can do so. You can send us a message or an email at thecatholicbuzzpodcast@gmail.com. And guess what, Josh?
What?
We're now on Facebook and Instagram.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, you can follow, our page on Facebook. It's at The Catholic Buzz. And on Instagram, it's The Catholic Buzz Podcast. And we have such a great social media team. You know? I say team, but it's really Ben. Ben is the team.
But
and he's
great.
doing such a great job on our social media. So follow us on Instagram, like us on Facebook, and you can drop comments, call our bull on our Facebook page. You can leave it in the comments, also on our Instagram posts as well. This has been
Matt will answer you.
Yes, of course, Matt will answer all the comments. Yeah.
In 2026, when I get around to checking my social media.
When you get a computer out on your place. Yeah. All right. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next week. My name is Father Daniele. For Josh Sullivan and Matt Van Milligan, you've been watching or listening to The Catholic Buzz.